Well, welcome everybody to tonight's Canadian Cheese Collective meetup. So we're recording this meetup as we usually do. We've had a lot of requests to record this so that people can watch it after, because not everybody's able to attend in person. But we're very excited to have Mary Casella join us from New York City. So Mary, welcome.
Everyone, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining
being here.
us.
So just quickly for anybody who's new on the call here. So the Canadian Cheese Collective was started January 2022. And our goal is to build community within the Canadian cheese industry and to create educational opportunities for us to all learn and grow together. So at the end of last year, we put a request out to everybody as to what you'd like to see for the year ahead. And a number of people said more international guests. So Mary was one of the top people that came to mind. So I saw Mary do her presentation that she's going to do today at last year's American Cheese Society conference, and thought it would be a wonderful presentation to share with everybody, and great discussion, a way to kick off a discussion too. So Mary Casella received the Daphne Zeppos Research Award, I believe, right? Yeah, so the inaugural research award. So the Daphne Zeppos Teaching Award has been going on for a number of years in the US. Mary was the first to receive the research award, and Mary's going to get into that and what that means shortly here. So this meetup is going to be slightly different than all of our previous meetups. So what we're going to do is actually hand it over to Mary, and Mary is going to walk us through her presentation. And it's going to be about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for any questions. And then we actually have a few guests who we've invited to speak with all of us tonight. And they're going to share a little bit about a woman in cheese who inspires them, who they look up to, or has influenced their career in some way. So very excited to have you all here. And without further ado, Mary.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your night to tune in and hear me speak. It's always really great to see faces or actually meet people in person who you know on through Instagram or the internet and everything. Tracy, so lovely to see you again. And yeah, I'm gonna just jump right into it. Let's talk about women in dairy. Oops, sorry. Well, oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm here as a direct result of the hard work and passion of Daphne Zeppos. I personally never got to meet Daphne, but I've only heard amazing stories of her passion for teaching and encouragement. And since I received the DZRA in 2021, which I also can't believe it's already been 2 years since this happened, I've thought a lot about what it means to have been given this chance to learn and in turn teach and share what I've found. And I feel really honored to carry on Daphne's legacy in that way. And, it was just all the more poignant when I received this reward, knowing that this organization started on behalf of this incredible woman in dairy. And it feels good to just carry on what Daphne set the stage for. And so this research was born out of my desire to know more about the role of women in this work. And it has been incredibly rewarding to know that I'm not alone in wanting to know more about this. So I sought this project out as there seemed to be a real deficit in resources dedicated to and focused on the role of women in the world of dairy. Once I got started, though, turns out there is a lot of information out there. You just have to do some digging, and unfortunately, women's role does seem to get relegated to just a little chapter or a section, but there is information out there. And it bears repeating that I see this as a lifelong pursuit, and I've really only just begun to dive in. And what especially struck me in the early stages of my research is the work women do in and for dairy, both in the past and currently. And so it's around this idea of work and the labor women do that I've structured this talk. So to share a little more about me, this cheese world is like, it's so big and inviting, but obviously not everyone knows me. So as I'm a woman in dairy, I want to share a little bit about myself first. So it's been about 6 years since I got my start in cheese at a little shop called Campbell Cheese and Grocery, owned by sisters Alana and Erin Campbell. So I had no cheese experience, but Alana and Erin took a chance on my interest to learn, and they gave me the room and tools to grow during my time there. It was at Campbell's that I discovered my passion for cheese and its history and culture. And ultimately, it is what has led to be where I am today, both in my career and having this platform to speak. I met some of my closest friends behind the counter, and I'm sure some of you know the joy that comes from working with and amongst women, especially behind the counter. It's some of the most fun I've ever had. And in my comparatively brief cheese career, I've had the pleasure to work with many women. The past few years have been peppered with varied experiences within the industry, each one, though, marked by inspiring, strong, and intelligent women that I've met. Last year, I had the opportunity to work along the women of Crown Finish Caves as an affineur. And, that was such a unique experience. And it really just solidified what I already knew about working with great women in the teamwork and just bonding that we experienced. So that desire to learn that started at Campbell's has never ceased, and it was in my effort to learn everything I could about the history and deep connection between women and dairy that led me to apply for the Daphne Zepos Research Award. At the point of my proposal, I was at a real loss to find any resources that I felt truly got to the depths of this history or that fully expressed just how impactful women had been in the industry and continue to be. And it continues to thrill me every time I come across new information or even share this information again and meet new women with their own stories, shared and unique experiences, and everyone has just been so open to sharing, and I'm really thankful for that. So next, I'm going to start with someone who I actually met several years before I even knew that I would work in cheese. So this is Nancy Tabor Richards. This is a dairy maid. I first met Nancy in 2008 in Trumansburg, New York, when I was a photography student at Ithaca College, long before I had any idea that I would work in cheese. I chose Nancy as a subject for a photojournalism project, with which I wanted to highlight the work of dairy farmers in the area. And I found Nancy through a contact through neighboring Cornell, and I got to spend a few weeks with Nancy watching her while she worked. So I wasn't cut out to be a photojournalist, and even as I conducted this research, I found myself my shyness getting the better of me. But my poor journalism skills were no indicator of my interest in and admiration for Nancy. She was a one-woman powerhouse making farmstead cheese from the milk of her family's cows. She was a businesswoman, a wife, and a mother. At the time, I didn't have the knowledge or skills to ask deeper questions about her work, but I keenly observed with my lens. And meeting Nancy has stuck with me all these years, on one hand, because it was some of my favorite work from my school years, and on the other, because I've always revered her strength and skill and kindness to welcome me into her space. And like I said, not to mention, once I did start working in cheese, I just couldn't believe the kind of coincidence and foreshadowing. So I introduce you to Nancy first because her story encapsulates one version of what it is to be a modern day dairy maid, and also illustrates quite closely what the life and role of the dairy maid of yore was like. Nancy made and sold cheese produced from the milk of her family's herd, which provided a source of income for her family, sustenance for them, and contributed to the agriculture and economy of her community, all the while taking care of her family through traditionally ascribed domestic duties of women. Women's work has undoubtedly been undervalued and overlooked over time, deemed to not be true work, lacking in skill and expertise, and unwarranting of proper compensation, if any at all. It should not be taken for granted, though, just how important women's work is to the very success of our societies, whether we deem their labor as work or not. When we look at the work of women within the world of dairy, we can clearly see how these sentiments express themselves, and I believe you'll recognize them in the stories I share tonight. So, across industries and around the world, there is still work that is considered to be suitable and appropriate for women, and that which is not. Since it was considered to be exclusively the work of women for nearly 600 years, with some exceptions, of course, dairying, as defined as the business of operating a dairy or conducting work related to dairy products, is an especially useful lens through which to further explore the value of women's work. It's not to say that in more contemporary times, women are as overlooked as we once were, but there's still a lot of room for more recognition. I'm a woman in dairy, and I've experienced and continue to experience firsthand some of these shortcomings. And just from meeting and speaking with other women, I know they experience similar matters as well. And it is for the stories and voices that may go unknown and unheard that I work on this project. And because after each of these interactions, I've been left inspired and motivated to keep doing the work. And as the saying goes, woman's work is never done. So I want to give you a sense of just how deeply women are tied to the work in dairy without diving into a full history lesson by taking a close look at the word dairy. The meaning and usage of words hold great importance, and once I learned the origins of dairy and dairy maid, I found it very hard to separate this new knowledge from how I perceived the work. We all know various definitions of the word dairy, depending on the context in which it's used. What you might not have known, like I didn't, is that it has its roots in the naming of women's work. Dairy stems from the Old English day, which meant female servant, woman who handles food in a household, housekeeper. By around 1200, day, when attached to maid, specifically meant woman in charge of milking and making butter and cheese, dairy maid. And then when combined with the suffix "airy," dairy, it came to be understood as a place for making butter and cheese or a dairy farm. Then later by the 1550s, milkmaid was also used to describe a woman employed in a dairy or one who makes and sells butter, milk, and cheese. Dairy is still the word we use to describe these products we make, sell, consume, the entire food group and industry. Dairy maid, however, is a somewhat antiquated term that slowly faded from use as women were gradually pushed out of the forefront of this work. And while it is a succinct descriptor, I do feel like it's lost a bit of its heft, and frankly might come across as a little cutesy or condescending. And it was really important to me to recognize that there is great meaning in these terms, and it holds a lot to consider their foundation. And when you think of this, there is no dairy without women's work. And I would, with the utmost respect, call any woman in this business a dairy maid. While great changes have occurred over the past 100 years or so, historical and sociological ideas around gender and gender roles still persist. There are, of course, easily made connections between women, gender, and dairy on a biological level, but I'll be focusing more on the sociological aspects, meaning predominantly held and prescribed social ideas about women. As we learned with the root of the term dairy, this work used to be fully accepted as the realm of women. In Deborah Fink's Not to Intrude, a Danish perspective on gender and class in 19th century dairy, she makes it abundantly clear that Danish men wanted nothing to do with milk or milking. Sentiments such as it was creepy for a male to milk cows and that it was a matter of dignity and gender identity were socially upheld even by women. It's not until around the 19th century that we begin to see a shift in the regenderization of dairy work as men step in and take over. And it's necessary and important to talk about women's domestic work in relation to dairy work because the two went hand in hand for decades as making value-added dairy products was woven into the rest of a woman's workday. In general, women's work in the home is not seen as true work. Scholar and activist Silvia Federici speaks of reproductive labor, not in regards to literal childbirth, but rather all the work women do that is sustaining the family and the home, work that is essential to our societies, but largely unrecognized or compensated by our economy. Women's labor is free labor. Even outside the home and into the work sphere, in our case, the dairy, women were held to standards one may hold the mistress of the home to. As Deborah Valens makes clear, a great responsibility fell on the shoulders of the housewife and her abilities as a dairymaid, and there were many thoughts on the qualities which a good housewife and dairymaid should have. An able dairymaid or mistress should be clean and efficient. One cannot help but to think of the saying, a clean home is a happy home. As women were being pushed out of the dairy, they were ever more encouraged to hone these attributes so long as they kept them to the oversights of the household, especially middle and upper class women. So I'd like to introduce you to a woman who melded both the ideal of head dairy mistress and one in the ways of a woman well versed in the domestic arts. So this is Ada F. Howie. In 1925, she became the first woman to serve on the Wisconsin Board of Agriculture. After inheriting her family's farm in Elm Grove, Wisconsin in 1897, at the age of 45, Ada would embark on a lifelong commitment to agricultural reform. At a time when society was heavily divided into man's world and women's world, business, power, money versus family and home, Ada arguably brought the finest female virtues to the farmlands of Wisconsin, and she gained widely held praise and recognition for her dairy farming practices that utilized distinctly feminine values and practices. Ada invested careful time and thought in taking over Sunny Peak Farm. She immersed herself in learning about various breeds and created a business plan that would start small, allowing the farm to grow only as the profits from the 2 original cows would allow. Author Nancy Unger notes that this occurred during a time when women were compelled into activism, seeing men of business seek high profit over morality. Ada wanted to create an approachable farm model that others could follow and succeed with, and she criticized men's mindless waste, hurriedness, and profit-driven ideas. Smaller was better in her mind. It was not just Ada's feminine wiles that led to her recognition and widespread study of her methods and innovations. Her approach to farming, rooted in domestic principles, had reason and practicality behind it and real calculable results. From those 2 original cows, Ada soon was raising what would be the largest herd of purebred Jerseys in Wisconsin. She was also a proponent of the idea that well taken care of and happy cows would yield more milk. It was not just the nature of a good breed, but also the nurture shown towards them. While perhaps unconventional, her methods such as playing music for her cows became regarded as sound practice. Keeping in line with how a mistress would run her home, Ada eschewed that the dairy should be as clean as a champion kitchen. And she led by that sentiment, instilling sanitary practices 30 years before any kind of legislation on sanitary milk production existed. Curtains in a barn might seem frivolous, but they kept flies out while allowing airflow. The barn was scrubbed weekly, and all milkers washed their hands before milking to prevent the spreading of disease. And not just a sanitary measure, but again, caring for the comfort of her cows. They were not tied, but allowed ample standing room and the ability to lay down. Ada made a point to present her achievements as a result of conventional notions of femininity and women's work. It was easy for some to mock the way she treated her cows and outfitted her farm as silly and trivial. But the fact is, these domestic practicalities merged with work life quite spectacularly. And for the remainder of her life, Ada traveled around the country, even to Europe, speaking about agriculture and homemaking. Ada lived during a time when, if you were of a particular class, women were expected to occupy themselves with making the home comfortable and beautiful. Certainly, by this time, dairy work was seen as less and less suitable for women. With Ada's story, we can see how her feminine and domestic experience, which men so badly wanted to oust from dairying, was in fact a crucial part of her success. This blurring line between domestic work and farm work is especially notable in dairying, as not only was dairy work literally done just outside of or next to the home in some cases, but this was done in relation to and timed around all other housework. To recall reproductive labor, this other housework included everything from caring for children and the elderly to mending and making clothes, and of course, cooking. There's plenty to criticize in this social structure where women are relegated to maintaining the home as well as seeking personal professional careers and other employment. But it should be noted that the daring path has also been sought in a positive light exactly for its proximity to caring for the family. So I grew up in New Jersey, and while I was surrounded by dairy farms, I was completely unaware if cheese was being made in the state and who was making it. So when I learned about Jess Clark of Nonchalant Cheese in Vernon, New Jersey, I knew I had to meet her. It was not very long once we got to talking before Jess frankly stated that she had always wanted to be a mother and that agriculture was a path that allowed her to raise and provide for her children in a meaningful way. In fact, her children are very much a part of her day-to-day activities on the farm. Her sons Zeke and Jonah joined us while we talked and walked around the farm, and it was apparent just how involved Jonah, the eldest, was. I posed to Jess what it is that she thinks draws women to this work, and is it anything inherent in women, whether socially or biologically? Jess does believe that a want and a need to provide for the family is certainly part of why she does this work. She reflected on the traditional nature of the setup she and her partner have. She joined him on his farm where he was already doing produce and eggs, but not dairy. He had his work and was happy to have her join him, but didn't want her stepping on his toes, so to speak, and was not going to make changes to something that was working for him. For Jess, animal husbandry and dairy was already her passion and biggest interest, but it became quite literally her place. We both noticed the distinct realms her situation mimicked and concluded that historically, having the cow in the barn that was not so far from the house, and then cheese making was in the house, it all just made it more accessible for the woman, and thus it was a natural flow of work life. Jess also reflected on how distinctly the experience of being a mother has influenced how she thinks about her work. The first time she milked a cow, she was nursing a baby, and it was so powerful for her that an animal was going to let her handle her udder and share her milk. It was profound in such a way that she's not sure that a man would understand in the same capacity. Amongst the conversations I've had with women, I've noticed this recognition of the distinctly female experience and how it lends itself to empathy with animals. I would note that I believe this is not just biological, but qualities women have that are socialized into us from an early age. Jess was still nursing at the time of our conversation and said that when she brings the cows in for milking, she'll drizzle molasses on the hay. Does she think that the cows need molasses, and is it even enough to do anything? No, but she joked, she's making milk, and does she need chocolate at 4:00? Yeah, she does. So she reflected on and laughed about the paradox of this treat, considering that she feels so passionately about having her herd on grass and on pasture. And then she'll just, give another glug of molasses anyway. But she can justify it in her own way. And as we continued to talk, I enjoyed hearing the way in which Jess thought about her work. She didn't really learn cheese making until she got her own animals, which at the start she was milking a Jersey and 3 goats just for the family. And from there, she started with cheese making books, but as she was reading them, what she was learning just didn't feel right to her. And to quote Jess, she said, "People have been making cheese before there were thermometers, before there were clocks." She said, "No one was following these recipes when they had to start a fire to do the laundry for their 12 children." And with this ethos in mind, Jess set out making her own recipes after coming to the understanding that it's really just A plus B plus C and any number of other variables. At the onset of the industrialization of cheese making, this way of thinking was one of the very things that men would use to discredit women's abilities to make quality cheese. Cheesemaking wasn't even really what Jess liked to do, in fact. It's more of an end to a means of being able to work with animals. That, and she enjoys eating cheese, but laments that as a farmer, you don't really have the funds to buy someone else's cheese, so you make it yourself. At Nonchalant, they make raw milk cheese from their herd of about 30 jerseys, give or take. I believe she has sheep now. This was at the time, about 2 years ago. Milking happens once a day, first thing in the morning, and goes straight to the creamery and is immediately turned to cheese. Just notes that her creamery, which was not by her own design, is of mismatched sizes of equipment, far too large of that, etc. And they just use hot plates and 5-gallon pots. Whey from the day before is used to coagulate the milk, and she'll only intentionally inoculate if she wants a particularly bloomy rind. We bonded over the great agriculture of New Jersey and how wonderful it was that Jess was doing a unique thing amongst her community where there's a lot of produce, beef, and fluid milk dairying, but nothing quite like what she's doing here. It's no news to anyone here that farming is difficult, especially on a small scale. Jess has had her fair share of troubles from the local government. There was a problem getting a license to milk and make cheese from the state, but the county handles licenses for the sales side of things, and that was very difficult for her. Jess has been making cheese for 5 years, and this was the first year they were able to have on-site sales at the store. Her first obstacle was the county health department, and then she ran into issues with the town because the zoning department said she wasn't selling for retail. Looking back frustratedly, she commented that she was only going to make the town better and more interesting, and her business and couldn't understand all the red tape. In the end, Jess had to essentially create 2 businesses, one that produces cheese and then one that buys and resells it already packaged. So sharing all this, and Jess's story resonated with me in the way it spoke to the life of motherhood, caring for a family, and domestic roles. And I can't help but think of feminism in the Back to the Land movement and how that really spurred the resurgence of artisanal cheesemaking, especially here in the United States, in large thanks to women. Arguably, Jess manages her business in a way that it best serves her family. And though this work, she's not only, and through this work, she's not only supporting her family, but her community and the environment. So an important aspect of how we talk about women's work is the distinguishing between craft and profession, especially how it differs for men and women and the spaces we think of when we talk about the two. In the domestic or female realm, woman is hobby keeper, homemaker, family cook. In the professional or male world, man is expert, money earner, chef, so on and so forth. It's not until the beginning of the industrialization of cheesemaking that we really start to see dairy work referred to as a profession. And what's more, a job that requires skill and intellect or higher education. There were women who made the cut into the professional world of dairying, but ultimately it was men's entrance that deemed it worthy of such a title. Skills in the home come from inherited knowledge and traditions, whereas professional skills come from higher education, science, reason. The problem with thinking about work in these ways is that it excludes much labor from being taken seriously as work and worthy of compensation. It was when men began to see butter and cheese not as just crafts, part of domestic markets, but as true commodities and viable items for external markets, that they began to take a real interest in dairying. One of the things I hope to achieve with this project is to illustrate the globally and culturally shared experiences of women in dairy, even in places that don't typically get thought of when discussing dairy cultures. Mexico, while it is in fact a country with an incredible dairy culture, is shamefully underrepresented. In, let's see, this would have been 2 years ago, or no, sorry, last May, getting my timeline mixed up. I had the opportunity to go to Oaxaca City, where I did my best to absorb and observe the women there, considering my Spanish is quite limited. As I visited the many mercados throughout the city, I noticed that nearly every queseria or cremeria was helmed by a woman, and many were even named after a woman. In some cases, the cheese being sold were in fact made by the woman selling them, but no matter, they could all sell with skill and efficiency with the swiftness of any experienced market worker. There's still so much more I would like to learn about cheeses and the women who make and sell them in Mexico, because I know for a fact there are incredible women doing incredible things on various scales. But in my search to find a cheesemaker, I came upon Dona Rosa in Etla, just north of Oaxaca City. Etla is the home of quesillo. In fact, the origin story, or myth really, like many great cheeses, claims that a distracted young girl forgot to tend to the curds properly, and in an attempt to hide her mistake, covered the curds with hot water, thus creating the perfect pasta filata stretch. I found Dona Rosa through a Google search, and despite the listing, her shop has no clear demarcation, and only after I asked around for her was I directed to what I would find to be her home. After asking in my broken Spanish if I could watch her make cheese, Viennas, she said, and led me outside through a screen door. In the most simple of setups, there was a tank, maybe 50 gallons, nearly the size of Rosa herself, atop a small unlit burner, where curds had already set. The space was far from any sanitized and technological make room, but had all the necessities for Rosa to do her work. I watched Rosa begin to move about her small workspace in a manner that spoke to the years, days, hours she has spent making cheese. Swift and agile, the mark of any experienced cheesemaker. As far as my understanding goes, the curds, which were already set, were made using rennet, guajo, and had been resting for about 30 minutes. And as I missed the beginning of her day, I didn't understand her response very well. I'm not sure where she gets her milk, but it's a very rural area, and there were roosters and horses in the area, so I'm assuming not too far from her workspace. And so she broke those curds by stirring them with a wooden pole into no specific size, and then began to separate the curds and weigh. I stayed with Rosa for about 2 hours, over the course of which she made 2 rounds of panela, several queso fresco, packed out requesón, and 1 round of quesillo. Rosa, who learned from her mother and her abuela, worked with rhythm and second nature. Cool water was added when needed, and curds were tested on the back of her hand for salt. Josiah Twomley would surely be rolling in his grave, and if you're not familiar with Mr. Twomley, he arguably did improve modern cheese-making methods, thanks in large part to experienced dairy maids, who he in turn had no problem denigrating for their practices. But as science moved in, methods used by experienced dairy maids, such as using touch to test the set of curd, were looked down upon as inaccurate and resulting in poor make. But it's a bit of a digression. And as Rosa poured buckets of whey, I told her, "Tu es fuerte," to which she replied, "Not as strong as her mother." Later, as she began to pack out rounds of queso fresco, her daughter Abby joined us, at one point letting her know that the queso fresco con chiles was muy picante, so Rosa mixed in more curd. Abby explained in Spanish that Rosa has many customers and also relies on tourists coming to see her make cheese, thanks to that same Google listing I found. Spending time with Dona Rosa filled me with a lot of joy, and my heart was so full after our afternoon together. For me, it felt like the kind of bonding I often experience with women over work, and especially in the kitchen. The way Rosa would scrape a bowl and her hands with a spoon reminded me so clearly of my mother's movements in the kitchen when I would watch her cook. Rosa welcomed me into her space so warmly and openly, and the space was not just her workplace, but her home. There's this ever-present theme that for women, the role and space of the homemaker blends and bleeds into other work and other spaces. As I mentioned previously, this has historically been the case in women's dairy work, and we have seen it with each woman I've introduced you today. Rosa literally steps in and out of the home and the workplace, and they are one and the same. The fact that Rosa makes cheese quite literally out of her home should not change the way we think about her work, though. This is no hobby. Rosa makes cheese 2 times a day, and amongst her workspace were detailed notes of a businesswoman, market locations, and quantities of cheese. Craft, of course, can be a positive word. You're a craftsman, skilled in something, but it can also be used to describe a pastime that may not be taken all that seriously, particularly in regards to women in something made in the home. Because much of the labor women do does not exist within an office or professional setting, or is not equipped with machinery and technology, it is not acknowledged as true work and linked to professionalism. But Rosa not only feeds her family, she supports her family through her skill and knowledge. And beyond that, she supports and feeds her community and local economy. Women's ability to turn milk into value-added products as part of their housework was undeniably important to the economic well-being of not only the family, but the community, and in some cases, the economic health of a country at large. Deborah Fink notes on the importance of women sharing dairy knowledge and skills over generations in regards to the rural economy. In fact, some feudal payments were made in the form of butter produced by women. Not only did women's dairy products sustain a family through literal sustenance, it also provided the family with income to purchase other needs. The value-added model of dairying is not only practical, but has proven itself crucial over centuries in regards to supporting economic health. So we're going to finish up by returning to Nancy, who I had the pleasure of reconnecting with last spring. So we caught up over a phone call, and it was really awesome to now have deeper knowledge, having worked in this industry, and to have more engagement and a deeper conversation. And she was still as open and giving during our conversation as she was when I first met her. So before we got into it, Nancy shared that it had been about 9 years since she had to halt her production, as the FDA had found listeria cells on her wooden aging boards. She was also sure to make clear that she doesn't mind being regulated. It's a matter of having more clearly defined rules and expectations from FSMA and the FDA that small operations can look to for guidance and resources. It's maddening, she said, that the cost of testing in certain infrastructure weigh much larger on small businesses, and the relative cost way beyond what it would be proportionally for larger businesses. But despite this huge setback, it was incredible to hear how much hope Nancy still has. She intends to get back into it and believes that small-scale, value-added dairying is still a viable path, and the idea of it continues to capture her interest. Nancy grew up on her family's Tabor Hill farm that was started in 1919 by her grandfather, who was a sharecropper, and the dairy was started in 1950. In 2000, when she was beginning to plan her operation, her two older brothers were running the dairy. Really traditional setup. She noted that the business had survived the 80s, when a lot of businesses were going out, but it was getting harder and harder, and there was less money to reinvest in the farm. Her intention was that through value-added processing to be able to pay them and sustain a sustainable price for milk. To get her business up and running, Nancy connected with an experienced Dutch cheesemaker named Jan Boyzekam, who was interested in what was going on in the American artisanal cheese world. Boyzekam taught Nancy how to make raw milk Borenkast-style Goudas. Unfortunately, again, they met several bumps along the way, and by the time they were ready to open in 2006, his visa was set to expire and he was denied renewal, so he returned to Europe. Nancy persisted, though, and opened Bronson Hill Cheesery, making 3 cheeses: Skylar, Aged Skylar, and Red Mech. Not only was it great to reconnect with Nancy, it was fun to find and reread my project from 14 years ago, almost like reading a childhood diary. Words, phrases, and methods that likely meant little to me then now resonated and excited me. Perhaps most striking to me, though, is that I suppose this reverence for women goes back as far as I can remember. I quote myself, "Nancy, a mother of 2, does every aspect of the labor-intensive and precise process. She makes cheese 2 to 3 days a week and commits the others to managing the business and taking care of her family." And I took care to note how busy she keeps herself with various tasks through her mate day and the strenuous labor she undertakes for being such a petite woman. I'm reminded of the awe I held for her. In my reporting, Nancy mentions that many of the household things she would also like to take care of, such as tidying the kitchen and fixing up the guest room. But at the end of the day, sometimes all she wanted to do was put her feet up. Once Nancy and I had revisited what I had vaguely remembered from when we first met, we talked a bit more generally about the current state and future of dairy and her experience as a woman. Nancy was shut down after 8 years of operation, and her brother sold off the family cows a couple years after that. As I mentioned, though, she still has great hope and believes that a small grass-based dairy is the right model sustainably, economically, environmentally, and for the community. In her opinion, greater Northeast grass-based dairy is a sensible use of animal agriculture and can create a circular economy. And in contrast to that, she does not think that a big operation is the way to go. Her cousins up the road have around 10 to 12,000 cows, and while she respects that they're doing well and making money, she can't help but see the flaws. We spoke of how the beginning of the pandemic hit the market hard, how farmers were dumping milk. She keenly observed that large dairies face fragility in water supply, labor supply, manure management, fuel costs, any number of things. And they sell one product, milk, which is a volatile product. And she noted that with a smaller farm, you might not be able to make as much money as fast, but you can find a way just to serve your neighbors and ways to hang in there in times of extreme economic stress. Like many, Nancy wants to see things move in the direction of more organic, sustainable methods, and she does not find large-scale operations attractive or resilient. Small is the more resilient direction we should be supporting, she says. More and more, she feels that people are looking to clean air, land, access to the outdoors, and rural life can provide all of that, but you need to be able to make a living, and value added can do that. While she did not ascribe these characteristics solely to women, Nancy reflected that animal husbandry requires somebody who is calm and sensitive to a creature that cannot express their needs. Entrepreneurship, which farming is a type of entrepreneurship, requires somebody who is creative and observant, keeping an eye out for trends and for opportunities. And she noted that something about being a parent, particularly a mother, lends itself to these things, but ultimately it's a personality characteristic. Compassion and creativity and pragmatism, these are just certain things that are required to do a good job, she said. This was not the first time I had heard this expressed from any of the women I've talked to. I personally do think these are traits commonly inherent in women, if not biologically. Certainly they are socialized into us. But perhaps that is a whole other conversation. As a mother, one thing that was helpful for Nancy about having the business when her kids were little was that it was a home-based business, literally feet from the house, so she could be around her kids and be available to them and still be doing something fun and interesting, which was a big deal for her. She also liked being able to give them the kind of rural upbringing to her kids too, and by around 5 and 7, they would help her at the farmer's market. Nancy has faced many obstacles. Near the end of our chat, she brought it up that she was now divorced from her husband, and that as a woman, it was really painful for her when she got shut down because it was just starting to take off, and that was her ticket out of a bad marriage, and then they shut her down. She reflected that it is a challenge if your relationship is not good and you're dependent on the other person's income. It's really difficult to correct it. This made me think of how dairying has provided a great source of autonomy and independent means of earning income for women throughout history. Prior to industrialization of cheese and butter making, prior to industrialization, cheese and butter making allowed women to not only support their families with their earnings, but support themselves. And then later, until they were almost entirely excluded, women could be hired in cheese factories to continue to earn a living. Women are capable of so much, if only to overcome the innumerable obstacles that we may face. After hearing the troubles that Nancy had been through, it was incredibly encouraging and inspiring to hear her passion and hope. One that instills in you the faith that, yes, there are kindred spirits and like-minded people out there. And she is just one of the women amongst the many out there with the same spirit, drive, and intelligence. So I hope you have all enjoyed hearing about Jess, Rosa, and Nancy as much as I enjoyed getting to meet them. I can't express enough how happy and honored I feel to have this platform to share these stories of women who otherwise might not get to speak to such a broad audience. When I think about the history of women in dairy, I cannot help but see how their stories resonate and carry on this legacy as skilled and experienced businesswomen and entrepreneurs who contribute to not just their families, but their communities and the culture at large. Prior to this talk, Kelsey had shared with me some experts from a book I hadn't heard of, Heather Menzies' By the Labor of Their Hands, the Story of Ontario Cheddar Cheese. Awesome. And there's a section on the role of women in the development of the cheese industry in Ontario. And what I read was all too familiar of many of the other findings, and not to mention the fact that there are only a mere few pages dedicated to speaking about women. And again, that's something that I hope to ultimately have with this research that I'm doing, is to not have it just be an expert and a small section, a chapter, but something that covers the expanse of time of women committing themselves to this work. And I can't emphasize enough the significance of women's work in dairy in cultures and countries around the world, and how this work quite literally sustained local and larger communities and economies. And as history is so often recorded by and told from the perspective of men, we miss out on the voices and roles of women, making it all the more important to highlight them. And that's kind of all I want to keep doing, is just highlighting what women have achieved, what women are achieving, women of the past and women of today. So thank you for tuning in. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation with us, Mary. That was great.
Thank you.
Kelsey is clapping. I've never seen that before. That's hilarious. Yeah, that
Thank
was
you.
awesome. It was inspiring to hear some stories from different places around the States and Mexico as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, awesome. And so in the same spirit of continuing to share about other women who have inspired women in our own local community as well, we've asked 4 different people to share with us tonight, 4 different women, Canadian women, to share with us about a woman in the cheese and dairying industry who has inspired their career or their life in cheese and dairy thus far. And so I think I'll ask Tracy to go first. I'm just going to actually stop sharing this page, and then we can have people take the floor we've got 2 to 3 minutes per person. And then we'll wrap up shortly after 8 o'clock when we're done. And yeah, so thank you, Mary. And then we'll toss it over to you, Tracy.
Okay. My inspirational woman in cheese is Mary Quick. I had to go with a Brit. Although I'm now Canadian, I had to go with a Brit. Her family have been farming the same land in Devon in England since 1540, and she takes the terroir of her cheese really seriously. So since 1960, when her mother began making cheese, Mary has been learning and inspiring others with her matter-of-fact stance on flavor. She describes working with natural starters as special and important to make our cheese what it is. The farm employs the New Zealand system of grass-fed mixed breed cows to maximize the flavor, not just the yield, and therefore the financial aspect. Almost half of Quick's cloth-bound cheddar is exported to America and Australia. And Mary describes the microflora on her cloth-bound cheddar as like a mold garden. She explains how even 10 miles away, the cheese tastes different. She says, cheese is a joy and a pleasure that is legal and it's good for you. So using milk from nearby herds of goats since 2003, Quicks has also produced a goat milk cloth-bound cheddar. Mary founded the Academy of Cheese, a multi-level educational system that better enables people to learn, practice, and demonstrate knowledge for a variety of jobs in cheese. She says this enables them to get better paying jobs, continue their professional development. She is a regular judge for the American Cheese Society, and her cheeses have won numerous awards, including British Cheese Awards, International Cheese Awards, Artisan Cheese Awards, and the World Cheese Awards, and many others. Where I grew up was a couple of hours from Devon and a couple of hours away from Cheddar Gorge. So Quick's cheddar was available at my local supermarket. As a premium brand, it was enjoyed as a luxury. Mary Quick inspires me as a woman in cheese because despite the fact that cheese was industrialized and male dominated, she carried on regardless. She advocates for natural farming processes that reduce the methane emissions from her livestock and supports sustainable agriculture. Quick's cheddar is traditionally produced. The blocks of cheddar are turned by hand for the cheddaring, and it's stacked 6 times to drive out the whey. Although her cheeses are made now with pasteurized milk, heritage starters have been closely guarded and supported throughout her entire career. Mary Quick has been a huge impact on my own cheese making, although our circumstances couldn't be more different.
Awesome. And just tell us a little bit more about who you are quickly, Tracy. Just
Yes,
maybe not everybody knows what you do and who you are.
I'm new here. I'm Tracy Johnson. I own Cheese Needs and I run the Facebook group Learn to Make Cheese, which is the largest in the world for home cheesemakers.
She's a Canadian, even though she's a little bit of a Brit as well.
I'm Canadian now, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm a big fan of Mary Quick. Her daughter Jane, who is taking over as well, starting to run things a little bit more herself at the farm, which is exciting as well. Amazing. Okay, Courtney Dollywall from Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I was last week. Please tell us who you are and who has inspired you in your career.
So, hi, thanks for having me, Erin and Kelsey. My name is Courtney Dollywall, and I own the Cheesemongers Fromagerie, a retail cut-to-order cheese shop in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And today I wanted to introduce somebody who some of you may not have heard of, others perhaps. I wanted to mention Sue Sturman. I first met Sue in 2014. I was practicing as a professional engineer and had decided that I thought I wanted to start learning about the cheese industry with the eventual goal of opening a shop. I had no one in Winnipeg to learn from. I tried some courses here. I tried everything I could to figure out a way to get a little bit of cheese education, to no avail. I started Googling how I could learn cheese. And I had always told myself if I was going to open a shop, I was going to do it right. So I found a course through Academy Opus Cassius, which was there was a French and an English school in France, in the Auvergne region. And I took all of my holidays and all of my money, and I went and took a 3-week course there where Sue was my English speaking teacher. Sue worked in marketing for a number of years and then moved over into hospitality and food. She worked at the Cordon Bleu in Paris, where she worked alongside Julia Child and began catering. And then she ended up moving on to the Ritz-Carlton in Paris, and then eventually found her passion in cheese. So Sue started off as my teacher, and we lived in the same house while she was teaching me for those 3 weeks. And I think she stayed up with me almost every night, practicing wrapping, practicing cutting, practicing any skill that she felt I needed to improve on until I had it right. And then when I came home, she reached out and said, let me know when and where we can meet, and I'm going to introduce you to whomever is in the area. And so from there, I reached out to her at one point and said, hey, I know you're in Boston and I'm going to be in New York. Maybe I can come see you. She said, better yet, I'll come see you. And the next thing I knew, I had a weekend where I toured cheese shops and Crown Finish caves alongside Sue, Max McKelman and his lovely assistant that he had at the time, Sam Frank, Brian Kaiser from the then Casella, Carlos Yeskis, Benton Brown ended up joining us for a day. And basically this engineer from Winnipeg who was just trying to learn cheese was connected with everyone and anyone that I wanted to meet. And through Sue, I have met countless other women in the industry. I've also had mentorship and help from Kendall Antonelli and Juliana Arubru. And Sue never stops. Her mentorship continues long after you are her student. She still reaches out and offers help, support, friendship at every point along the way. And I just really admire what she does for people in the cheese community who maybe don't have the connections that they otherwise, end up making through her. And that's it.
That's fantastic, Courtney. What an amazing person. Sue is absolutely incredible and incredibly selfless. She's there to serve others and make sure that everybody in the industry grows together. So so happy that you've had that experience. So thank you for sharing. I'd like to introduce Maria. So Maria is the cheesemaker and owner of Golspie Dairy. So Maria, over to you. Can you give us a quick overview of who you are and a woman in cheese who you look up to, or somebody who inspires you?
Our internet is really not great right now. I might turn my video off. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you just fine, yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to turn that off. So I couldn't choose just. Courtney was talking before about Sue Sturman. She is excellent too. I was lucky enough to take a course with her this past fall too. And oh my goodness, she's wonderful. But the main woman in cheese that I wanted to talk about today is actually our very own Heather Thelwell. She was our first wholesale customer, and she has just been such a wonderful support for us. She's been so great because she takes the time not just to send in an order, but she lets me know all her thoughts, and not just her thoughts, but her customers' thoughts. And she has just been basically the best customer you could ever ask for, especially as a new cheesemaker. It's really, everything is new and there's so much to learn. So just having her there just to kind of let us know what the thoughts are has been just so great. So Heather, thank you so much. I don't know if you knew that you were our first customer, but you definitely were. And I guess the other woman in cheese is I have a 2-year-old daughter who is also my biggest fan. She's always asking for more milk or chocolate milk or just cheese. And she's figured out how to open.
I think we lost you, Maria.
Can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah, you just came back in.
Like that? Okay. Do you know it?
We lost you when you were about to say that she's figured out how to open something.
Oh, she's figured out how to open our fridge, so she can actually just get her own cheese now. So yeah, it's just been fun. So yeah, and I can't wait to meet you. I think that's the thing about the Canadian industry is we're all so spread out and far apart, but when we do get the opportunity to meet each other, and we're excellent. So thank you guys for orchestrating this and bringing us all together in this way.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing. I have to second that nod to Heather there. So Heather's on the call here, and I'm sure Heather's tearing up because of your such kind words. But Heather has been an inspiration for me too. She's absolutely an incredible human. Something you may not know about Heather is she is also a librarian. And every time we have these calls, she adds a wonderful working bibliography in the chat to go along with everything that we're chatting about. So
thank you for doing that, Heather. I always notice when you can't help yourself. It's what you do. Thank you for doing that, Heather.
All right, over to Nancy. Nancy is the president of Plaisir Gourmet. So Nancy distributes fine Quebec cheese throughout Canada and represents some incredible cheesemakers from Quebec. So Nancy, can you give us a brief intro and tell us about a woman in cheese who inspires you?
Yes, of course. Thanks for inviting me. As you will see, English is not my first language, so I will take my time. I will do
That's
my
okay.
best, but it's so easy. It's easier for me in French. But for Kelsey and Erin, I can do a lot. So I'm there. As Kelsey said, we are a cheese distributor. Me and my husband started our cheese distribution company in 1999. So we will celebrate our 24th anniversary. And today we represent 15 different artisan cheesemakers. And the word artisan is really important for us. We select, we distribute, and we promote these wonderful cheeses. And during the Mary presentation, when I said that you had the Daphne Zippo Awards. I had a flashback because I met Daphne Zippo around maybe 2004 in New York at the Artisanal Cheese Center. I can remember that it was a very nice meeting and she was so great. So I'm really happy to see that you won that award. So congratulations. Many women inspired me professionally since 1999. I want to introduce you two amazing and talented young women that deeply impressed me over the years. I want to introduce you Marie-Chantal Houd de la Fromagerie Nouvelle-France. Maybe that you know Zachary Cloutier, but she does also La Madeleine, the wonderful sheep milk yogurt. And also Rose-Alice Côté de la Fromagerie Médan with the 14 arpents and also the cousin and many good cheeses. I was not able, in fact, I would like to speak about all my cheesemakers, my woman cheesemakers, but these two, they have a similar path. Both are born and raised on farms. They became cheesemakers in their early 20s, so they were really young when they became cheesemakers. They are very talented, they are very passionate, and they are really creative. Both are determined in French, but determined and stop at nothing to achieve their goals. They are incredible. They quickly take action to realize their dreams. And during the pandemic, both built a cheese factory reflecting their ambitions. So I love these two women because they know what they want and they do to realize their dreams. So that's really wonderful. Their journey is somehow different. Rose-Alice is part of the 6th generation of the Côté family. She used the milk of the farm, so it's a farm. She does farmstead cheese, so it's the milk of their herd of brown Swiss for the main part of the cheese production. But since last year, she used the milk of another dairy, and it was one of her dreams to producing goat's milk cheeses. So now maybe you have the chance, or you will have the chance to discover La Voisine. La Voisine, it's soft part with a wash rind. It's a small cheese of around 300 grams. And it's absolutely wonderful. So you have to try it. Probably that we now she does more and more. So probably we will be able to sell all around Canada. And concerning Marie Chantal, her father had a farm, but Marie Chantal and her brother Jean-Paul, in their 20s, decided to become associate to create the Fromagerie Nouvelle-France Sheep Farm and Fromagerie. But they were young and it was not easy to start a cheese business. It was around 2010. So they had the chance to work with Fromagerie du Presbytère, that you know probably, with the famous Louis d'Or and other cheeses. And Jean Morin was supporting, very supportive, and facilitate the startup of their new venture. But now, since last year, she has her own fromagerie. It's a wonderful place in the Eastern Township. So you have a chance to visit. It's really a place to go. It's wonderful. So you can go to Fromagerie Nouvelle-France, and after Fromagerie du Presbytère, and also La Station. They are very near. The three are very near, maybe 1 hour from each other. Marie Chantal, what is special with her, she really wants to, her wish is to allow Canadians to discover and appreciate cheeses made from sheep's milk. Her creations are modern, but respect the cheese-making traditions. Her artistic and scientific mind could not have found a better medium to express itself. So these two women represent well the new generation driven by the desire to revitalize the region and contribute to the development of the Canadian artisan cheese industry. I can tell you that I'm proud, and it's very motivating and inspiring. I cannot say that word, but it's really motivating to collaborate with them. And I'm really proud to represent these two women, but also other wonderful women in the cheese industry. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Merci beaucoup, Nancy. Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories and recognizing women in cheese who inspire you. Erin, I'll hand it over to you. Do you want to share a little bit about the next meetup, June 19th?
Yes. So we are, well, and I'll just tell you before everybody leaves, I'll just tell you a couple things coming up. We are taking a break for July and August. There will be no Canadian Cheese Collective for July and August. We know that the weather is amazing and there's 5 million other things to be doing this time of year, but hopefully you will consider coming to join us on June 19th. We have Molly Brown of the Wisconsin, I don't know what her actual title is. She's with Wisconsin Cheese, Wisconsin Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin. And we're going to actually have a full session on all the different options that are out there for cheese education. And specifically, we're going to talk about something that Molly Brown created called Cheese State University, which is an incredible free resource. A lot of my customers from across the country have been using it to help their staff learn and grow about cheese and, you know, all the very interesting, complicated things about cheese that there is to learn. And the more you learn, the better cheesemonger, the better distributor, the better salesperson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you become. So we're going to talk about cheese education, and we hope that you guys and many more CCC members will join us for one more session before we break for the summer. And yeah, then we've got a couple really exciting things coming up in the fall, but more on that later.
Yeah, we've got a rough plan of up to January at this point, so we're very excited, working ahead. If we've got 2 minutes, I'd like to say a big thank you to Mary for joining us. And thank you so much to Tracy, Courtney, Maria, Nancy. Really appreciate you all speaking. And Mary, I'd love to hand it back to you to say the last words. And one question that we ask all of our guests is, what would you like to see in cheese 5 years from now? If you were to look into the future, what would you like?
Oh gosh. I think in 5 years from now, I think so I do work as mostly a cheesemonger now, and for me, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is I just want to be able to share as much quality cheese with everyone. And I really would like to see, I think the industry has made strides, but just more people being able to experience cheese, which they may like say is like, oh, it's too expensive, it's too fancy, it's anything, but kind of just continue to democratize this amazing world and bring in younger generations. I mean, not like, I'm not that old yet, but just continue to see more and more people see like what the value in cheese as part of our environments and part of our culture. And I just want to make that available to everyone. So I hope in 5 years we're still making amazing cheese all across the world and sharing with all who want to. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Mary. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.